Lieutenant Cole Braddock kicked the mop bucket across the hangar deck and laughed while gray water ran under the nose of a $100 million fighter. The girl on her knees didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't say a word, and nobody watching understood they had just humiliated the most dangerous pilot in the United States Navy. Before we go further, please subscribe to the channel. Stay with me all the way to the end and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far Ren's story has traveled tonight. Ren Calloway reached out and set the bucket upright before the water had finished spreading. That was the first thing that was wrong about her, though nobody in that hangar had the eyes to see it. A person who gets humiliated in public does one of two things. They flare up or they curl in. They go red and loud, or they go small and quick and get out of the space as fast as their body can carry them. Ren did neither. She simply corrected the problem in front of her the way a person corrects a gauge that has drifted, and then she went back to work on her knees with a rag she pulled from her back pocket, moving in slow, patient circles from the outside of the spill toward the center, because that was how you kept dirty water from finding the seams in a deck. Braddock waited for a reaction. When none came, something in him got louder. "You believe this," he said to the three lieutenants leaning against the tool crib behind him. "She's still cleaning, like nothing happened." "Maybe she likes it," one of them said. His name was Petrosian. He was 26 years old, and he had never once in his life been shot at by anybody. "Maybe this is the most action she's seen all month." They laughed the way young men laugh when they're performing for each other. Ren kept wiping. Her ponytail had come loose over one shoulder, and she pushed it back with her wrist because her hands were wet, and she did not look at any of them, and the not looking was so complete that after a few seconds, it started to feel less like submission and more like something else. Something closer to a door being quietly shut in their faces. Braddock felt it. He didn't have a name for it. It made him want to talk more. Hey, I'm talking to you." He crouched down, elbows on his knees, putting his face at her level in a way that was meant to look friendly and wasn't. "You got a name, or do they just call you Trash Detail?" "Calloway," she said. "Calloway." He tried it out. "How old are you, Calloway? 20? You look about 19. 25? 25, he whistled. 25 years old, and this is the job. That's rough. That's genuinely rough. You know what I was doing at 25? Yes, Ren said. It stopped him for half a second. Not the word, the flatness of it. She hadn't said it like a question, and she hadn't said it like a joke. She'd said it like a person confirming a fact she found unremarkable, and there was something in that flatness that was very slightly wrong. And Cole Braddock, who was 26 and had never in his life been afraid of a woman on her knees with a rag, felt an odd, small, cold spot open in the middle of his chest. He stood up fast and covered it with volume. "Get the trash away from my aircraft. I'm serious. Something drips out of that bucket and eats into a panel that's on you, and I will personally have your badge pulled." Ren wrung the rag out into the bucket. She stood. She was not tall, and in a hangar full of men in flight suits, she should have disappeared entirely, and for 2 years she reliably had. But something about the way she came up off the deck was economical in a way that a person who'd spent their whole life scrubbing floors would not have been. She came up without using her hands. She picked up the bucket. She took 2 steps toward the cart, and then she stopped and said in exactly the same tone she'd said her own name, "Your number 4 aircraft has a slow weep on the left feed line. It's behind the panel forward of the wing root. Your crew hasn't caught it because it doesn't show on the gauges until you're airborne and committed." The hangar noise went on around them. Somebody's impact wrench chattered 2 bays down, but in that little circle of 4 men, everything stopped. "What?" Braddock said. "Number 4, left feed. How would you—" Petrosian started, and then he laughed because laughing was easier than the other thing. "Oh my God, oh, she's a mechanic now. Cole, she's a mechanic." "You hear that with your mop," Braddock said. "I heard it standing next to it," Ren said. "Anybody could have." And then she pushed her cart away down the hangar toward the far end where the lighting was older and dimmer, and she did not look back. And Cole Braddock stood there with the joke half formed in his mouth and no one to say it to. Nobody at Merrill Point Naval Air Station knew where Ren Calloway had come from. That should have been strange. It was a small base tucked up on the northern strait where the coast folded in on itself, and small bases are gossip machines. People knew whose marriage was in trouble. People knew which chief was drinking again and which contractor's invoices didn't add up. But nobody knew a single thing about the 25-year-old girl who arrived at 4:30 every morning and parked her truck in the far corner of the lot, the corner nobody wanted because it added 6 minutes to the walk. She'd been there 2 years. In 2 years, she had not once been to the enlisted club, not once put her name on the sign-up sheet for anything, not once been seen with anybody outside working hours. If you had asked 100 people on that base to describe her, 90 of them would have said the cleaner, and maybe 40 would have added the young one, and maybe 10 would have gotten as far as the ponytail. That was not an accident. That was the entire architecture of her life. She liked the base best at 4:40 in the morning, when the corridors were dark and the fluorescents came up one bank at a time with that low warming hum, and there was nobody in the world who needed anything from her. She liked the sound of the mop head slapping wet against tile. She liked the specific weight of a full trash bag in her fist. She liked that at the end of 8 hours, she could look at a floor and know exactly what she had accomplished, and that nothing she had done that day could get anyone killed. That last part was the whole reason. Everything else was decoration. Morning Wren, Petty Officer Nia Sandoval said it the way she said it every morning, cheerful, unbothered by the fact that she got maybe 6 words back on a good day. She was 29, she worked at Command, and she carried a coffee in one hand and a folder stack in the other, and had never in her life been able to walk past a human being without acknowledging them. Wren had spent the first 4 months at Marrow Point trying to figure out what Sandoval wanted from her. It had taken her that long to accept the answer, which was nothing. Morning, Wren said. Big day, 22 aircraft going up on the block exercise, half the wing. Sandoval shifted the folders under her arm. Met says weather holds through 1800, clear and boring. Wren had already started pushing her cart. She stopped. She looked out at the ridge line. She looked for maybe 4 seconds, and Sandoval, who was already half turned to go, saw her face change into something so unlike her that it registered as a small physical shock. Weather won't hold, Wren said. Sorry. There's a wedge coming off the saddle between the two peaks. See how the cloud's spilling instead of climbing? That means the air underneath it is colder than the air on top, and it's going to slide down the valley instead of going over it. By 1400, it'll be on the deck at the approach end, and it'll be moving in layers, going different directions. She said it evenly the way you'd read a departure time off a board. That's the bad kind, not the kind that hides the runway, the kind that lies to you about where the runway is. Sandoval stared at her. How do you? But Wren's face had already closed like a door swinging shut, and she looked down at her cart and said, What do I know? I push a mop. And she was moving and she was gone around the corner before the question could finish forming. Nia Sandoval stood alone in the corridor for a good 10 seconds. She looked at the ridge. She tried very hard to see what the girl had just seen, and she could not because to Nia Sandoval it was sky, just sky, gray and ordinary and nothing. But she opened her folder and she wrote it down anyway. Fog on deck approach, N 1400, layered, per WC. She didn't know why she did it. She only knew that when a 25-year-old janitor says a thing like that, in a voice like that, a person ought to write it down. 8:09:10 that morning, Senior Chief Roy Dunham pulled the access panel on the number 4 aircraft because a 19-year-old airman had asked him to, and found jet fuel weeping down the inside of the skin from a hairline separation on the left feed line. I didn't say anything for a long moment. He put 2 fingers into it. He brought them out and rubbed them together and smelled them. And then he sat back on his heels and looked at that thin, wet line, with a feeling crawling slowly up the back of his neck. Dunham had been putting aircraft in the air for 22 years. He knew exactly what he was looking at. It was small. It was so small that it would not have shown on a single gauge on the ground, would not have flagged on pre-flight, would not have done one thing to make itself known until that aircraft was up at altitude, pulling G, burning down a tank that wasn't feeding the way the computer thought it was feeding. Then it would have become known all at once. Who told you to pull this panel? Dunham said. The airman shifted. Nobody, Senior Chief. Somebody did. Lieutenant Braddock, sort of. Kind of. The kid was going red. He said the cleaning lady told him there was a leak on number 4, and he thought it was funny, and he was telling everybody about it at breakfast. And I don't know. I figured it takes 10 minutes. Dunham stood up. Say that again, he said. The cleaning lady, Senior Chief, the young one with the ponytail. She told Lieutenant Braddock there was a weep on the left feed. Roy Dunham wiped his hands on the rag that lived in his back pocket, and he turned around and he looked all the way down the length of that hangar to the far end, where the light was dim and a small figure in an olive green shirt was quietly stacking chairs, and for the first time in 2 years, he actually looked at her. Not glanced. Looked. And he thought there is no way to see that from outside the airframe. There is no way to hear it over an APU card. There is no way at all unless you have spent your life with your hands inside these machines, or unless you are something I do not have a word for. He walked down there. He got about halfway, and then he stopped because he realized he had absolutely no idea what he intended to say. And because the closer he got, the more clearly he could see the way she was stacking those chairs squared, spaced, load-bearing legs down 4 high and no higher, exactly the way a man stacks chairs when he has been taught by somebody who cared how chairs got stacked. Dunham went back to his aircraft, but the feeling did not leave his neck all day. This, Lieutenant Commander Silas Ward had been head of security at Marrow Point for 3 years, and he prided himself on being a man who noticed things. He knew which airmen came back over the fence line after curfew. He knew which vendor was shorting the galley on produce weight. He knew every dog in base housing by name, and most of them by temperament. Silas Ward was 44 years old and constitutionally incapable of letting an unexplained thing sit unexplained. And for about 8 months now, the unexplained thing sitting in the middle of his base had been a girl with a cleaning cart. It had started at the range. Live fire familiarization. A Tuesday and Ward had been up on the observation deck with a cup of coffee going cold when he'd noticed the maintenance staff working the far side of the lot. In one of them, the young one, the girl, was standing in a place that made him put his coffee down. Because there is a spot on a range like that. There's exactly one. It accounts for the berm geometry and the ricochet angles off the steel and the way blast wants to travel through the gap in the revetments. And it is not the place that feels safe. The place that feels safe is behind the concrete, and the place that feels safe will get you a fragment through the calf on a bad day. The place that is safe is out in the open 11 feet to the left in a spot that every instinct in a civilian body screams at you to leave. She was standing in it, not tensely, not like she'd worked it out. She was standing in it the way you stand somewhere you have stood 10,000 times. Ward had filed it away. Then there was the day the backup tower radio went down, and 2 technicians spent an hour and 40 minutes failing to bring it up. And Ward had walked in to find the girl emptying the trash bin next to the opened equipment rack, and he would have sworn he could not prove it. He would not have said it out loud that her eyes went across that exposed board, once left to right the way you read a line of text, and her lips moved very slightly. And then she saw him and looked away and went back to the trash. He filed that away too, and then there was the way she watched aircraft. Everybody on a naval air station watches aircraft. That's human. They're beautiful and they're terrible, and it is very hard not to look. But most people watch them the way you watch fireworks, mouth a little open eyes following the light. Ren Calloway watched them the way an old sailor watches the sea from a hill. There was longing in it, and there was respect in it, and underneath both of those, there was something that looked so much like grief that the first time Ward saw it, he had to look away himself. So on a gray Tuesday, he found her in the east passageway, refilling paper towel dispensers, and he put his hands behind his back and made himself smaller the way he did when he wanted somebody to talk. Miss Calloway, got a minute? She turned around and her face was pleasant and completely empty. The face of a person who cleans floors and would like no trouble. Something wrong, sir? Nothing's wrong. Just been meaning to ask you something for a while. He watched her hands, not her eyes. That was the trick. Faces lie easily. Hands take practice. How long you been with us? 2 years, sir. About. And before that? Something moved behind her eyes and was gone so fast he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. Different work. Different work, Ward repeated. See, that's the thing. I've got a feeling it was interesting work. It wasn't. Last month at the range, he said it gently. You were standing in the safe spot, the real one. Took me 9 years in this uniform to learn to stand there, and I still have to think about it. Where'd you learn that? And here is the thing, Ward noticed, the thing he would think about for a long time afterward. She didn't go still. Amateurs go still. A person with something to hide freezes up and their hands stop, and that's how you know. Ren Calloway's hands kept working. Stack of towels dispenser, click latch next. Perfectly smooth, perfectly ordinary. But her breathing changed. It went slow and deep and even down into the belly, the way a person breathes when they are deliberately managing their own heart rate. He had seen exactly two kinds of people that do that in his life. Neither of them cleaned floors. I read a lot, she said. There's not much to do at night. Senior Chief Dunham says you found a weep on a feed line last week, from outside the airframe, without instruments. I heard a hiss. Nobody else heard a hiss. Then nobody else was listening, sir? Ward looked at her for a long moment. He was not a stupid man. He knew he had walked right up to the edge of something, and he knew with absolute certainty that if he pushed one more inch, she would close so completely that he would never get another chance at it for as long as they both lived. So he stepped back. All right, Miss Calloway, you have a good day. You too, sir. He walked away. At the end of the passageway, he stopped and turned around, and she was already back at the dispensers, already invisible again, already nobody. And Silas Ward made himself a quiet promise, the kind of promise a certain kind of man cannot help making. He was going to find out who she was, not to hurt her, not to expose her, just because there was a mystery standing in his passageway in an olive green t-shirt, and he had never once in his life been able to leave a mystery alone. I was going to be very sorry about the timeline. Here is the part nobody on that base understood about Ren Calloway, and it is the part that explains everything else. She was not hiding because she was ashamed. Shame is loud. Shame makes you over-explain, makes you flinch at your own name, makes you build a false history so detailed, it collapses under its own weight the second somebody leans on it. Ren didn't do any of that. If you'd asked her a direct question, she'd have given you a short, true answer or nothing at all. She was hiding because she had made a promise, and she was the kind of person who did not know how to break one. 2 years ago, there had been 9 other people. She could still hear all of them. Diaz, who sang off-key on the open net until she made him stop and then hummed instead, which was worse. Halloran, who could put a crippled airframe down in weather that would have killed anybody else, and who never once in 4 years raised his voice. Boone, 23 years old, who called her ma'am even though she was barely older than he was, because that was how much they had all trusted her. They had gone in to bring people out, 214 of them on the ground out of time with the ring closing. And Ren had made the calls, all of them, one after another in a voice that never changed pitch. And the calls had been right, and the people had come out, and 214 human beings woke up the next morning because of decisions she made in about 9 minutes. And 9 of hers did not come home. They gave her things for it. They put her in a room with a general and a flag and told her that the math was a victory, that 214 against 9 was not just acceptable but extraordinary, that she should be proud that she had done something almost nobody alive could have done. She had listened to all of it. She had said thank you, and then she had gone home to an empty apartment and sat on the floor with her back against the door for most of a night, and somewhere around 4 in the morning, she had made her promise out loud to a room with nobody in it. I will never hold another person's life in my hands, not one, not ever again. Not because she doubted herself. That was what the counselors had all assumed, and she had let them assume it because it was simpler. The truth was worse, and she had never said it to a living soul. She did not doubt herself at all. She knew exactly how good she was. She knew that on that day she had been better than anyone had any right to be, and it had still cost 9 lives, and if that was what her best looked like, then her best was a thing that got people killed, and the only honest response was to take it out of the world. So she had. She had found the quietest, smallest, most consequence-free work she could find on a base far enough north that the weather kept people indoors and nobody asked questions. Trash, floors, chairs, work where the worst possible outcome of a mistake was a wet tile. 2 years, 700 and some days of it. And every single one of them, she had woken up at 4 in the morning already awake, because at 4 in the morning her body still expected a brief. The thing that happened next happened on a Thursday and lasted about 1.5 seconds, and it changed everything, and only 2 people in the world noticed it. Ren was pushing her cart past the systems maintenance bay a little after 11. That bay was not on her route. Her route ran the outer passageway and cut through the equipment corridor. and the systems bay was down a short spur that dead-ended at a locked space, and there was no reason at all for her to go down there except that somebody had left a full trash barrel out in the spur, and she was the kind of person who could not walk past a full trash barrel. Chief Emmett Slate was sitting at the bench with a logbook open in front of him. Slate had 11 years at Marrow Point, which on a base with that much turnover made him practically a landmark. He trained the technicians. He wrote the local procedures. He had commendations on the wall and a reputation as the man you called at 2 in the morning when something ugly was happening to a system nobody else understood, and he came every time without complaining, and he fixed it. If you had gone through that base and asked every person on it to name the last human being who would ever do anything wrong, a solid third of them would have said Emmett Slate, and the rest would have said him second. Hay was 48. He had a photograph of a boat he was rebuilding taped inside his locker. He looked up when Wren's cartwheel squeaked on the deck, and he closed the logbook. That was all. He closed a book. People close books. People close books 100 times a day for 100 reasons. And if any other person on that base had walked past that spur at that moment, they would have seen a senior chief tidying his bench and thought nothing at all about it for the rest of their lives. But Wren Calloway had spent 4 years of her life reading human beings under stress for a living, and she had not stopped being able to do it just because she had stopped wanting to. I didn't close it and set it down. He closed it and slid his forearm over the cover, and his eyes came up to her face before they came up to the cart, which is backwards. A startled man looks at the noise first, and then he smiled and said, "Morning," in a voice that was one note too warm for a man who had said maybe 11 words to her in 2 years. Wren's hand stopped on the cart handle for exactly 1 second. 1 second, not more. Her body wanted to do about 6 things, and she let it do none of them. She felt the whole old machinery come up out of the floor of her chest. The thing she had spent 2 years pouring concrete over that man just hid something from a janitor. Nobody hides anything from a janitor. The only reason to hide something from a janitor is if you've become so afraid of being seen that you've stopped being able to tell the difference between people who matter and people who don't. And then she looked at the deck and said, "Morning, Chief," and took the trash barrel and left. She thought about it for approximately 4 minutes on her way back to the equipment quarter. And then she did the thing she had trained herself for 2 years to do, the thing that was the entire point of the life she had built. She let it go. Not my business, not my base, not my problem. I push a cart. She would think about that decision later, much later, in the small hours of a night when everything was already on fire, and she would understand that it had been the single worst call she ever made. Not the mission, not the 9. This, a 4-minute decision in a passageway made by a woman who had trained herself so thoroughly to be nobody that when the thing finally walked past her in daylight, she had looked away out of habit. Chief Emmett Slate sat at his bench for a long time after she'd gone. Then he opened the logbook again and looked at the entry he'd been working on, and he wrote a time in the left-hand column, and the time he wrote was 0340. That evening, Wren clocked out at 1500 like always and drove her truck the 11 miles to town. The apartment was 1 room and a kitchenette above a hardware store that had been going out of business for as long as she'd lived there. She had a mattress, a chair, a kettle, 4 plates. On the wall by the door there was nothing at all, and that was deliberate because she had once put a photograph up and had to take it down again within a week. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat in the chair by the window with the cup going cold in her hands, and she did the thing she did every night, which was to try very hard not to remember. It never worked. It had never once worked in 2 years. Diaz first, always Diaz, that awful humming. The way he'd draw a breath before he keyed up so you always knew half a second early that he was about to say something stupid. Halloran's voice so calm it made you calm. Boone God Boone, who'd had a girl back home and a plan and a whole life queued up behind him like aircraft on a taxiway, all of it just waiting for him to be done, and who had said ma'am to her 20 minutes before. She had given the order. She would give it again. That was the part she could never explain to anybody and had therefore stopped trying. Given the same 9 minutes, the same air, the same numbers, she would give the exact same order again because it had been right, and 214 people were alive because it was right, and it had still killed 9 of the only people she had ever really loved. Both of those things were true at once, and there was no arrangement of them that made a life you could live inside. So she had stopped trying to live inside it. She'd built a smaller room and moved into that instead. She set the cold tea down on the sill. "I'm still sorry," she said out loud to the room the way she did most nights. "I'm always going to be sorry." And then, because the day had been strange in a way she couldn't name, she added something she had not said out loud in 2 years. "I'm not going back. You know that. I'm not." She sat there a while longer. Out past the town, out over the ridge. The wedge of cloud she had pointed at that morning was still sliding down the saddle between the two peaks, thickening as it came exactly the way she had told Nia Sandoval it would. 3 things happened over the next 4 days, and none of the people they happened to understood that they were the same thing. On the first day, Silas Ward requested a routine background verification on a base civilian employee named Ren Calloway and got it back in 90 minutes and read it 4 times. It was complete. That was what bothered him. It was too complete, a clean, tidy, entirely unremarkable history, employment and address, and everything in its place, all of it going back exactly 24 months and no further. Before that, there was a high school, and then there was a gap, and then there was nothing. Not a bad record, not a sealed record, nothing the way a footprint is nothing. Ward sat with that file open on his desk until well past dark, and what he kept coming back to was this: a person with a real ordinary past has a mess in it. Overlapping dates, a gym membership that ran 3 months past a move, a phone number that shows up on 2 forms. Real lives are cluttered. This wasn't cluttered. This was clean. Somebody built this, he said to nobody at 9 at night. Somebody built her a life. And the very next thought he had, the one that made him sit up straight and go cold from his hairline down, was, or somebody buried one. On the second day, Chief Emmett Slate signed out a systems timing recalibration on the coastal array logged as routine, performed at 0340 alone. Nobody questioned it. Nobody ever questioned Slate. 2 technicians saw the entry that week, and both of them scrolled past it without their eyes stopping, because it was a routine job signed by a man who had never in 11 years given anyone a single reason to look twice. On the third day, Captain Adrian Halloway approved the block exercise schedule, 22 aircraft, 4 ships in the North Sector. His own daughter leading the second element, because she'd earned it, and he'd made a point of not interfering, and he initialed it and thought nothing about it at all. And on the fourth day, Ren Calloway got up at 4 in the morning and drove to work and clocked in and pushed her cart down a dark corridor into the last ordinary hour of her life. She saw Braddock again that morning, and he was worse than usual because he had spent 4 days being needled about a janitor finding a fuel leak he hadn't found. That was the thing about men like Cole Braddock, and Ren had known a lot of them. Their confidence wasn't a foundation, it was a skin. You could not injure it a little. You either left it alone or you tore it, and if you tore it, everything under it came out, and what was under it was almost always a boy who had been told his whole life that he was special and had recently begun to suspect that nobody had checked. He came at her across the hangar with 2 of his guys trailing behind, and she saw it coming from 30 feet away, saw it in his shoulders and his hands, and she made the calculation she had made 10,000 times in 2 years. Absorb it, it costs less, and she kept pushing her cart. "Calloway," she stopped. "You want to explain to me," he said, "how you knew about that feed line?" "I already did." "No, see, you gave me a joke answer. Now I've got a senior chief asking me questions, and I've got the maintenance officer asking me questions, and everybody in the ready room thinks it's the funniest thing that's ever happened, so I'd like a real one." "There isn't one, sir." "Try." Ren looked at him, and for 1 second, one single second, the first in 2 years, she made a mistake, which was that she let him see her eyes properly. Not a janitor's eyes, the other ones. The ones she kept in a locked room behind everything else. Cole Braddock, who was 26 years old and had never been afraid of anything in his charmed and easy life, felt something crawl down the middle of his back. His grin came apart, and he didn't know why. It was the feeling a small animal gets when it realizes that the still shape in the grass, the one it has been walking past all week, is not a rock. And then Ren looked away, and she was a janitor again, and the moment was gone so completely that afterward he genuinely could not have described it. "There's no answer, sir," she said quietly. "I heard a hiss. You should be glad somebody did." He shoved the cart. Not hard, that was almost the worst part. It wasn't even a real shove. It was a small, mean thing done in front of an audience, and the cart hit the leg of a tool cabinet, and a stack of clean rags went across the deck. And one of his guys laughed, and one of them didn't. Then pick those up and stay away from my aircraft, Braddock said, and walked off. Wren knelt down and picked up the rags one by one and put them back in the bin, folded squared. She was not angry. That's what nobody would ever have believed about her. She was thinking with a kind of distant clinical sadness that she had watched men exactly like Cole Braddock walk out to aircraft with that same skin on, and she had watched what happened when the sky finally stopped being a training block and became the thing that could kill them. She had listened to that skin come off over a radio at 19,000 feet, where it was much too late to learn how to carry fear, because nobody had ever made him carry any on the ground. She had held a man's hand once through a radio while it happened to him. She had talked to him the whole way down. She had kept her voice warm and level and unhurried right up to the last half second, and then the channel had gone to static, and it had stayed static, and she had sat there afterward holding a transmit switch that no longer connected to anybody. I hope you never find out, she thought at Braddock's back. I hope you go your whole career and never once find out what you actually are. Most of you do. That's the mercy. She stood up. She pushed the cart. Behind her up on the observation level, Senior Chief Roy Dunham had watched the entire thing with a rag in his fist and a feeling in his chest he could not name. And Lieutenant Commander Silas Ward, standing beside him, had watched it too and was thinking about a file with 24 months in it and nothing before. And 400 yards away, in a maintenance bay, nobody had any reason to visit. Chief Emmett Slate finished a line of code and closed a logbook and looked at the clock on the bulkhead. And the clock said it was Thursday, and the exercise was set for Friday at 1300. Wren Calloway pushed her cart out into the passageway and looked the way she always did at the ridgeline in the sky above it. The cloud was down off the saddle now. It had taken 4 days to come, the way she'd said it would come in 4 sentences, and it was lying in the valley in layers thick and slow and moving against itself, and it would be on the deck at the approach end by early afternoon tomorrow. She stood there for a moment with her hands on the cart. She had promised 9 dead men that she would never again hold a living person's life in her hands, and she had kept that promise for 731 days. She had one left. Silas Ward did not sleep that night, and by 6 in the morning he had done something he was going to have a hard time justifying if anyone ever asked. He'd pulled the badge access logs. Not hers. He told himself that mattered. He pulled the whole building, every card swipe in and out of the systems. Maintenance spaces for the last 90 days, because at 2 in the morning, sitting with a personnel file that had a hole in it where a life should be, he had asked himself a question that would not go away. The question was, why would somebody build a fake background for a woman who cleans floors? And the only answers he could come up with were all bad. And one of them was that she was hiding from something. And one of them was that she had been hidden by somebody. And one of them, the one that had gotten him out of bed at 4:30, was that she was not hiding at all. That she had been put there. That somebody had put a person with no past onto his base on purpose. And he had spent 8 months admiring how quiet she was. So he pulled the logs, all of them, and he started reading, and by 0640 he had found something. It just wasn't what he was looking for. At 0338 on a Tuesday 11 days earlier, Chief Emmett Slate had badged into the array timing space. He had badged out at 0451. Ward looked at it for a while. Then he made himself scroll on because Emmett Slate badging into a maintenance space in the middle of the night was not a finding, it was a Tuesday. The man had been called out at 3 in the morning more times than anybody on that base. Half the reason the array worked at all was that Slate would come in at any hour without complaining. He scrolled on, and then he scrolled back, because there was no work order attached to it. Not missing, not pending. There was a completed maintenance entry in the log routine timing recalibration, signed and closed, but there was no requesting document. Nobody had asked for it. Nothing had triggered it. A senior chief had let himself into a restricted space at 3:30 in the morning, alone done delicate work on the timing system of a coastal radar array, signed his own work off, and gone home before shift change. Ward sat back in his chair. "That's not a call out," he said out loud to his empty office. "Nobody called you." I was still sitting there 15 minutes later, and the thing he kept doing, the thing that would eat him alive later, was arguing himself out of it. Because it was Slate. Because you do not build a case against a man with 11 years and a wall of commendations off a missing piece of paperwork. Because the last time Ward had gone hard at somebody on a hunch, he'd been wrong, and a good chief had transferred over it, and Ward had promised himself he'd be slower next time. So he did the reasonable thing. He wrote a note to ask Slate about it, casually. Monday, maybe when the exercise was done and everybody wasn't running, it was Burrow 65 S5 on Friday morning. Wren clocked in at 0432 like always and had the entire east passageway done before the base woke up, and for about 6 hours it was the most ordinary day of her life. She emptied 31 trash bins. She wiped down the coffee mess in the ready room while a dozen lieutenants stood around it in flight gear talking too loud, the way they always talked too loud on exercise days. She heard Braddock whole court about his scores in the block. Sim's second best isn't even close. And she heard somebody ask him if he'd checked his fuel lines lately. And she heard the specific quality of the laughter that followed. And she heard Braddock's voice go up half a register underneath it. She kept wiping. She had learned a long time ago that the counter was always the safest thing in a room. Nia Sandoval passed her in the corridor at 11:20 with an armful of flight schedules and said, "Hey, you were right about the weather." Wren stopped. "They pushed the launch window forward an hour," Sandoval said. "Met came in this morning and looked out the window and had a small heart attack. It's already at the approach end. They want everybody up and back down before it gets any worse." She shifted the folders. "How did you know that?" "Lucky guess." "Wren, I'm going to be late," Wren said and went. She got about 40 feet before she stopped and stood there for a second with her hand on the cart, and then she turned around and called down the corridor, "Sandoval." Nia turned. When it's layered like that, the shear sits about 200 feet up, and it runs the opposite direction to the surface wind. Wren said it fast, flatly, like she was getting rid of it. "If anybody comes down the approach on instruments, they're going to get pushed hard right in the last 10 seconds, and it's going to feel like the aircraft's broken. It isn't. Tell them to plan a wave off and not to fight it." Nia Sandoval stood in the middle of a passageway with her mouth slightly open. "Tell who?" she said. "Tell them you said it. Tell them the Met's wrong. Don't say where you got it." "Why not?" Wren was already walking. Nia wrote it down anyway, in the margin of the flight schedule in handwriting that had gone shaky for reasons she couldn't have explained. Sheer 200 feet, reciprocal plan wave off per WC. And then she went up to the tower and told a watch supervisor about it, and the watch supervisor said thanks and did nothing because a comms petty officer saying the Met was wrong was not a thing that moved anybody, and because he had 22 aircraft to get in the air. That single unheeded sentence saved 4 lives about 90 minutes later. Nobody ever knew it, but Nia Sandoval never even found out. At 1207, they started launching. At 1244, they had 22 aircraft up, and the block was working, and Captain Adrian Holloway stood at the back of the operations floor, with his arms crossed, and watched his daughter's element check in on the north sector, and felt the exact thing every father in that job feels, which is a low, steady terror that he had spent 9 years learning to keep off his face. Lieutenant junior grade Aaron Holloway was 27 and led the second element and had earned it, and he had made a point of never once putting his thumb on anything for her, and she had made a point of never once asking him to. And the result was a relationship in which they mostly talked about her car. At 1301, the coastal array dropped 4 tracks. That was all. 4 tracks out of 80, some gone for one sweep and back the next. The kind of thing that happens. A controller said, "That's odd," and made a note, and did not raise his voice. At 1303, it dropped 11. At 1304, the tone of the room changed. Wren heard it from the passageway. She was 40 feet from the operations door, working a section of deck she had already done that morning because there was a coffee spill and because she had nothing else to do with the last hour of her shift. The door was propped. They always propped it on exercise days. The room ran hot, and the sound came down the corridor to her, and she stopped pushing the mop. She did not hear words. She heard pitch. She heard the easy overlapping chatter of a routine day sharpen into something clipped. She heard the exact frequency change that happens when men who are trained not to sound afraid start working at not sounding afraid. She heard a chair go back too fast. She heard somebody say a word twice. And every single thing in Wren Calloway's body came up off the floor at once. Switch to backup array. Backup's showing the same picture. Then it's the display. It's not the display, it's the feed. Fix the feed. I'm trying to fix the feed. She stood in that corridor with both hands on a mop handle, and she understood completely in about 4 seconds what was happening in that room. Not the details, the shape. She had heard a system die like this before. Not all at once. That was the tell, that was the whole thing, because if it had gone all at once, they'd have known in 5 seconds what they were dealing with and pulled everybody home. It was going the other way. It was fraying one strand at a time, tracks, blinking out and blinking back in slightly wrong positions. And every man in that room was going to spend the next 4 minutes chasing the fray instead of the cause, because that is what the failure was designed to make them do. Designed. The word arrived in her chest like a hand closing. She told herself to push the cart. That was not a figure of speech. She stood there and she said it to herself in words. Push the cart, Ren. Not your base, not your problem. You push a cart. She got both hands on the handle and she got it moving, and she made it 4 steps down that corridor, away from the door, 4 whole steps, and she was going to make it. She was genuinely going to make it. And then a controller's voice came out of the operations room reading fuel states, and one of the numbers was low, and the voice that read it had a crack down the middle of it. Ren stopped, because she had heard that exact sound before out of a different throat in a different room 2 years ago, about 90 seconds before 9 people she loved stopped existing. She stood in that passageway with her hands on a mop cart and her heart going like a bird in a box, and she thought about Diaz humming on the open net and Boone saying, "Ma'am," and Halloran's voice so calm, it made everybody calm, and the static that came after in the 731 days of trash bins she had built on top of all of it. You promised, I know. You promised them, I know. Somewhere over the North Sector, there were 4 aircraft with a 27-year-old in the lead who had just lost her picture in weather that was going to lie to her on the approach. And there was a fuel number in that room with a crack down the middle of it. And there was exactly one person inside that building who knew what was actually wrong. Ren let go of the cart. She did not run. That was the thing 3 separate people remembered afterward, and none of them could explain why it frightened them so much. She walked unhurried, ordinary, a 25-year-old in an olive t-shirt with damp knees, right through the door of the most restricted space on Merrill Point Naval Air Station. For about 3 full seconds, nobody noticed her, because who notices the cleaner? Then a technician turned around with a headset half off his ear and saw a civilian standing in the middle of the operations floor and came up out of his chair. Hey, you can't be in here. Somebody get her out of here." "Who let her in?" "Ma'am, you need to leave this space," is a call security. And the whole room turned on her at once with the fury of frightened people who have finally found something they can actually control. 4 or 5 voices at the same time, a hand reaching for a phone, somebody's chair going over backward. Ren did not look at any of them. She looked past every single person in that room at the main feed, and she read it in one pass the way she had once read a sky, and she spoke. And her voice cut through the noise, not because it was loud, but because it was the only calm thing in the building. "It's not the feed. You've got a phase timing fault on the primary, and it's cascading into your backups because they're slave to the same clock. Break the slave. Run the backup on its own timing reference. You'll have a picture in 90 seconds. The room stopped. Not gradually, all at once like a switch. 12 people who had been shouting a half-second earlier stood in absolute silence and stared at a girl in a t-shirt who had just described their classified system with more precision than any of them had managed in 4 minutes. The technician with the headset stood there with his mouth open. Captain Adrian Holloway turned around very slowly from the back of the room. "Who?" he said. "The hell are you?" But Ren was not looking at him either. She had already crossed the floor. She was standing over the primary console over a young petty officer who had gone the color of paper, and her hands were hovering above controls she had no clearance to touch. And when she spoke to him, her voice changed completely. It dropped, it warmed, it became the voice a person uses on somebody. They are about to ask for something enormous. "What's your name?" "Rain Reynolds, ma'am." "Reynolds, there are 4 aircraft over the North Sector that just went blind, and one of them is low on gas." She said it gently. "I can put them back on your scope. I need you to let me. Right now, not in a minute. Now." Petty Officer Reynolds was 22 years old. He looked up into the face of a woman he had walked past 300 times without ever seeing, and what he saw there was not what he expected. It was calm. Not the fake kind. Not the kind officers put on. Total bottomless impossible calm, the kind that only exists in people who have already been all the way to the bottom of something and come back up, and Reynolds had never seen it before in his life, but he recognized it instantly, the way you recognize deep water. He stood up out of the chair. "Do it," he said. Ren sat down. And every person in that room watched a 25-year-old janitor put her hands into a failing military system with the flat, unhurried confidence of somebody who had done considerably harder things before breakfast. Captain Holloway crossed the floor in about 4 strides and stopped behind her chair. He did not order her out. Some instinct older than every regulation he had ever enforced told him that removing this woman from that seat would be the last decision of his career, and he stood there with his hands at his sides and watched her work. "You've done this before," he said quietly. Ren didn't look up. "A long time ago." Where her hands kept moving. On the main display, the first clean track resolved out of the mess. Then another, then 4 at once. "Somewhere they told everybody I died," she said to him. The tracks came home one by one. 80-some aircraft rebuilt themselves out of static in about 70 seconds, and the controllers dove back onto their nets and started reestablishing. Contact and up in the block, a lot of very frightened young pilots heard the tower come back to life and did not know, would never know, that the reason they were about to make it home was a woman in a t-shirt sitting in a chair she had no right to sit in. Roy Dunham heard about it in the hangar 90 seconds later from an airman who came through the door at a dead run saying the cleaner was in the ops room, and Dunham said the what? And then he was moving. Silas Ward heard about it from his own duty officer over the radio. In the words, "We have a civilian in restricted spaces," and he was out of his chair before the sentence ended, and the whole way across the base, he was thinking about 24 months of clean history and no clutter. And in the operations room, Ren Calloway did not celebrate. She sat forward, because as the picture came clean, as the sky resolved out of the lie and became readable again, she saw what the fault had been hiding. 6 contacts, low, fast, coming in from the northwest under the weather layer in a lane that should not have been open in the exact wedge of dead coverage that the timing fault had carved out of the array. Ren went very still. "Captain," she said. Holloway leaned in over her shoulder. She watched the blood go out of his face in real time. "That's not ours," he said. "No, sir, it isn't." And then she put her finger on the display about 40 miles behind the 6, and her voice did something it had not done all day. It got quiet. "And that one is," Holloway looked, "a single slow track, unarmed, straight, and level on a routine profile." "Kilo 22 said a controller, and then he checked, and then he said it again in a completely different voice. "Kilo 22, sir, logistics lift, 60 souls." Nobody said anything for 2 seconds. "They're not coming for the base," Ren said. "What?" "Look at their heading, sir." Her finger moved. "They're not lined up on your ramp. They're not lined up on your fuel farm or your array. They came in through a hole that opened at 1301, and they are pointed at a slow, unarmed aircraft with 60 people on it, and they knew where it would be, and they knew when." Holloway's mouth opened. Somewhere in the building, an alarm started, the real one, the one they drilled twice a year and never once believed in, and the sound of it went through that room like cold water. Ren stood up out of the chair. The t-shirt hung on her exactly as it had 10 minutes earlier. Nothing about her had changed at all, and everybody in that room felt something change anyway, and Captain Adrian Holloway found himself without deciding to standing up straighter. That was when Silas Ward came through the door with 2 masters-at-arms behind him and stopped dead. He looked at the woman standing at the center of the operations floor, and 8 months of small, unexplained things arranged themselves into a single hard fact in his head, and he heard himself say it out loud. "It's you." Ren turned. "It was always you," Ward said. "The range, the radio rack, the—" He stopped. He was a man who had spent his whole life noticing things, and he had never once in that life been so completely, so humiliatingly outmatched by something standing directly in front of him. "There's no file. There's 24 months of you, and nothing before it. Who are you?" "Sir," a controller said, "hostile flight is inside 40 miles. "Who are you?" And Ren Calloway, who had promised 9 dead men, who had built 2 years of trash bins and floor wax on top of the promise, who had walked 4 steps down a corridor, away from all of this, and almost made it, looked at the 6 tracks closing on 60 unarmed people, and heard the whole thing in her chest come down at once. That fault didn't happen, she said. Somebody built it. Somebody on this base put it in 11 days ago and armed it and pulled it at 1,300 hours today, and 6 aircraft were already inbound when he did, which means they knew the schedule, and they knew the geometry, and they knew exactly where the hole would be. She looked at Ward. You want to know who I am? Somebody in this building sold that lift, sir, and I'm the only person here who can stop it. And every second you spend asking me, my name is a second closer to 60 people dying. The silence in that room was total. I need a flight suit, Wren said, right now. Nobody moved. She had known they wouldn't. She had known it before she said it. 12 trained professionals and a captain. All of them looking at a 25-year-old cleaner in a t-shirt with dirty water dried on the collar, all of them running the same impossible arithmetic. So she said it again, and this time there was steel all the way through it, and it was the first time in 2 years that anybody at Marrow Point had heard what Wren Calloway actually sounded like. Captain Halloway, you have 6 advanced aircraft 40 miles out and a hole in your coverage that somebody cut on purpose. Your alert birds are down for the exercise. Everything you have up there right now is a training block with practice loads and kids in the seats, and one of them is your daughter. She held his eyes. There is nothing between those 6 aircraft and 60 people except this conversation. So I'll ask you one time, are you going to help me or are you going to watch? Adrian Halloway was 53 years old. He had flown 190 combat sorties. He had briefed admirals and buried friends, and he had not felt small in front of another human being since he was a lieutenant. He felt small now. Get her a suit, he said. Sir? A young officer started. She's a civilian. She doesn't have clearance to be in this room, let alone. I said get her a suit, Halloway roared, and the kid flinched and ran. Ward stepped in front of her. You're going to fly, he said. It wasn't a question. You clean floors, and you're going to get into a fighter and fly. And for just a second, the mask slipped, and Silas Ward, a man who noticed things, got a clear look at what was underneath it, and it closed his throat. It was grief, an ocean of it. The face of somebody being asked to walk back into the room where everyone she loved had died. I was never a janitor, sir, Wren said quietly. I just needed to be one for a while. And then she was moving, and the room moved with her, and 12 minutes earlier, none of them had known her name. Nia Sandoval was standing against the far bulkhead with her folders clutched to her chest, and she had not moved or spoken since the moment Wren walked in. She was thinking about a cold morning 4 months ago when she had bought 2 coffees instead of 1 on an impulse because it was freezing and because the girl who did the floors always looked tired, and she had handed one over and the girl had looked at it and then at her with an expression Nia had never been able to make sense of. She understood it now. It was the face of somebody who had forgotten that people did things like that. Like kindness was a language she used to speak and hadn't heard out loud in a long time. Oh my God, Nia said to nobody. It was you, the weather, the sheer. All of it was you, and we had you cleaning our floors. Wren heard it. She didn't stop walking. But as she went past, she said something so quietly that only Nia caught it. You brought me coffee once. I never forgot it. And Nia Sandoval, 29 years old, standing in an operations room with an alarm screaming, burst into tears without entirely understanding why. Out on the flight line, it had already started to come apart because word moves through a base the way fire moves through dry grass, and the word was insane and everybody repeated it anyway. The cleaner, the girl, they're putting the cleaner in an aircraft. Crew chiefs stopped where they stood. Airmen came out of the maintenance bays, and in the middle of it, still in his own flight gear from the morning block, having landed 9 minutes before the world turned over, stood Lieutenant Cole Braddock. He saw her coming across the ramp in a borrowed suit that fit her like it had been cut for her, moving with a purpose that made a crowd of 200 people go quiet, and something in him came completely off its hinges. No, he said. No, 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 somebody tell me this is a joke. He got in front of her. You can't even hold a mop straight, and they're putting you in my aircraft. Wren stopped. 2 years. 2 years of taking every single thing this kid had thrown at her, in the cart 4 days ago, in the rags on the deck, in the laughter, all of it swallowed, because silence was the price of being nobody, and being nobody was the only way she had known how to stay alive. She was not nobody anymore. Lieutenant. Her voice was perfectly calm, and it was the most frightening thing he had ever heard. You have 411 hours. Every one of them in good air in a training block with a wingman and a tanker and an entire country between you and anybody who wants you dead. You don't. I have flown missions that don't have names. She stepped forward, and Cole Braddock, who was not afraid of anything, took a step back. I have flown missions they burned the tapes of. I have brought aircraft home that had no business flying, and I have listened to aircraft go down that I could not save. And I have carried every single one of them, every single day for 2 years while you laughed at me across a hangar deck. He had nothing. His mouth was open and there was nothing in it. There are 60 people on that lift, Wren said. So get out of my way before 6 aircraft do to them what I have already lived through once. Because I am not burying another crew, not while I can still fly. And Senior Chief Roy Dunham, 22 years on a flight line, stepped up beside her and looked at Braddock and ended it in 5 words. Move, Lieutenant. The lady's got work. Braddock moved. She went up the ladder, and the way she went up, it made 200 people make a sound. They didn't mean to make a collective intake of breath, because you can fake a lot of things in this world, and you cannot fake the way a body knows a machine it has loved. Dunham came up behind her and started running the seat and the systems with her, and every single time he opened his mouth to say something, she was already there, already reaching for the switch he was about to name, already reading the display before his finger got to it. 3 times, 4, 6. He stopped trying. Ma'am, his voice cracked straight down the middle. 22 years I've been doing this. Who are you? Wren pulled her helmet down. Through the visor, she looked at the old chief with eyes that had been all the way to the far side of the sky. Call signs Ghost, she said. Now clear my ladder, Senior Chief. I've got somewhere to be. Roy Dunham went down that ladder like his legs had forgotten how to work. Up in operations, a controller assigned the call sign into the system, and it came up on the main display in 3 letters, and Captain Adrian Holloway looked at it and put his hand flat on the console because he needed something to hold. Sir, Ward said. Captain what? Holloway didn't answer for a moment. That call sign, he said. Ghost. Every pilot my age knows that call sign, Silas. Every single one. He swallowed. 2 years ago, there was an extraction. Classified so deep. Most people in this building don't know it happened. 214 people on the ground surrounded out of time. One element went in against numbers nobody should have flown against and held the corridor open long enough to get all of them out. Ward waited. They lost 9, Holloway said. 9 out of 10. And the one who came back, the one who ran the whole thing, who made every call, who got 214 strangers out and left 9 of her own people in that valley. They gave her everything they had to give. And then she walked off the face of the earth, and nobody ever heard from her again. He turned around and looked at Ward. Her call sign was Ghost. And I have been telling that story in ready rooms for 2 years, Silas, and every time I told it, I assumed she was dead. Out on the ramp, an engine came up. She's been emptying our trash cans, Holloway said. And 40 miles out, 6 aircraft that should not have been there closed on a slow, unarmed lift with 60 people aboard, coming in through a door that a man with 11 years and a wall of commendations had opened for them 11 days earlier at 3:40 in the morning. Adrian Holloway turned around very slowly. Say that to me again, he said. 11 days ago, 0338, Slate badged into the array timing space alone and closed out a recalibration on his own signature. Ward's voice was steady, and his hands were not. There's no work order. Nobody called him. Nobody asked for it. I found it at 6:40 this morning, and I looked at it, and I told myself it was Emmett Slate, so I wrote a note to ask him about it after the exercise. The operations room had gone completely silent except for the speaker. Where is he right now? Holloway said. He signed in at 0655. Ward already had his radio up. He's on this base. Then go get him. Sir, if I move on him with 2 masters at arms, and I'm wrong. Silas, Holloway's voice cracked like a rifle. There are 6 aircraft in a hole in my coverage, and a 25-year-old girl in the middle of them. You are not wrong. Go. Ward went out at that door at a dead run, and behind him a controller said, Sir, hostiles committing all 5 line abreast. And on the speaker, very quietly, they heard Wren Calloway say, here we go. 5 aircraft came at her at once, with nothing held back. And for the first 90 seconds, it was the closest thing to a slaughter that any of the people listening on the ground would ever hear. They pinned her, That was the word for it. 5 well-flown aircraft working a single defender from 5 different angles, and there is a limit to what geometry can do for you, and Ren hit that limit hard. She spent energy she couldn't afford. She spent altitude. She spent the last comfortable margin in her left shoulder, which had gone from screaming to something worse, a hot numb absence that meant the arm was going to stop asking permission soon. In the ready room, Cole Braddock listened to her breathing change on the open channel and put both hands flat on the table. She wasn't talking anymore. That was the thing that broke him. For 9 minutes, she had been steady and warm and conversational. And now there was nothing on that net but a woman working, and the sound of her working was the loneliest sound he had ever heard in his life. "She's going to die up there," said somebody behind him. Braddock turned around. "Shut your mouth," he said, and then he did the only useful thing he did in the entire 26th year of his life, which was that he grabbed the exercise board off the bulkhead, the one with every airframe's fuel state and configuration from the morning block chalked on it, the one he had been staring at for 9 minutes without seeing, and he ran. He ran across the ramp and up the ladder into the tower and shoved past a watch supervisor and got on the base net without permission from anybody. "Ghost Marrow Point Tower. Ghost, this is," his voice went. He forced it back. "This is Braddock." Silence. "You took 1-4's aircraft. It came off the block at 11:40, and it flew a full profile before you got in it. You do not have the fuel the panel is telling you that you have. There's a lag on the totalizer on that airframe. It reads about 400 pounds high on the bottom end. Everybody in the squadron knows about it, and nobody wrote it up." He was talking too fast. "I'm reading you off the board. You have maybe 6 minutes of hard maneuvering. 6, not 9. Do you copy?" For a second, there was nothing. "Then copy Braddock, 6 minutes, thank you." Cole Braddock stood in the tower with a chalkboard in his hands and started to shake. Ren took the number. She did not argue with it, did not doubt, it did not waste a half-second wondering whether the boy who had kicked her bucket across a hangar deck was telling her the truth. She took it, she folded it into the shape of the fight, and the shape changed. 6 minutes meant she could not outfly them. 6 minutes meant she could not wear them down, could not wait for a mistake, could not do any of the patient things that had killed one of them already. 6 minutes meant she needed the weather. She had watched that cloud come down off the saddle for 4 days. She had told Nia Sandoval about it at breakfast on a Monday and again in a corridor that morning. She knew where the shear lived and which way it ran and how the layers moved against each other because she had stood outside a hangar door with a mop in her hands for 731 mornings and read the sky the way other people read a paper out of habit, out of grief, because it was the only part of her old life she had never managed to give up. She rolled, inverted, and pulled straight down into it. Sir Reynolds said, "She's diving into the layer." "Into the what?" "The weather, sir. She's going into the weather." Holloway leaned over the display, and he watched a single friendly track disappear into the one piece of airspace on the entire coast that no sane pilot would enter on purpose. And then he watched 5 hostile tracks committed at full speed, chasing the only thing they wanted, follow her straight in. "Oh," Holloway said softly. "Oh, you clever, clever girl." Because inside that layer, their picture went to noise, and the shear grabbed all the 6 aircraft and started hitting them from underneath. And 5 men who had been perfectly coordinated 90 seconds earlier suddenly could not find each other, could not find her, could not entirely trust which way was up. And into that came a voice unhurried like a Sunday morning. "You feel that?" Nobody answered her. "That's the shear on the back side of the ridge. It sits about 200 feet up, and it runs the opposite direction to the surface wind, and it changes about every 90 seconds. A pause. "I've watched it every single morning for 2 years while I mopped the floor. You've had it for 40 seconds. Welcome to my house." In operations, the display went to almost nothing, 6 tracks reduced to intermittent flickers. "We've lost the picture," a controller said, and there was panic climbing back into his voice. "Sir, we've lost all of them. We can't see what's happening in there." "She can see him," Holloway said. He was standing very still with both hands flat on the console. "That's the entire point. She took them into the one place on this planet where 2 years of pushing a mop is worth more than 6 advanced aircraft." He shook his head slowly. "She's been ahead of everybody in this building since the second she walked through that door. Every one of us, the whole time." Inside the layer, the killing started, and it was not loud. Wren worked the shear like an instrument. She knew where the rising air lived and where the sinking air waited, knew the seams, knew how to put a wall of updraft under one wing and let it throw her sideways in a way that looked to the man chasing her, like she had simply ceased to exist and reappeared somewhere else. One of Merrick's pilots, disorientated, fighting his own aircraft as much as her, drifted into a piece of sinking air he had been steering him toward for 30 seconds without him ever once knowing he was being steered. It took him low and slow at the exact wrong moment, and he had to fight so hard to recover that he lost the entire world for 4 seconds. When he clawed his way back to level, she was already there, waiting, exactly where she had known he would end up. "That's three," she said, and there was no triumph in it at all. Only an enormous tiredness. "I keep hoping one of you will turn around. I've had 2 years of hoping. Turn around and go home." The operations room did not erupt this time, they had learned. They watched the flickering, and they held their breath, because 3-1 is still 3-1, and a storm that kills your enemy will kill you exactly as dead. "Three down." Ward said he was back, breathing hard, and he had come through the door with news nobody had time to hear yet. "Captain, she's taken half of them." "Half," Holloway said, "and any one of the three that's left can still end her. It only takes one. She knows that better than we do." He looked at the clock. "Where's Slate?" Ward's jaw worked. "He's not in the maintenance space, sir. He's not in the barracks. His truck's still in the lot and his phone's on his bench, and nobody has laid eyes on him since 10:40 this morning." The thing about the shear was that it did not care whose side it was on. Wren had spent 4 minutes using it to take three men apart, and the same violence that dismantled them was working on her the entire time. A sinking column caught her wrong and slammed her down, and she fought the controls with everything she had left in both arms, and her left one, the shoulder, the old one, the injury she had never reported, because reporting it would have meant conversations she could not survive. Simply quit. Not weakened. Quit. For about 1.5 seconds, it was not part of her body. She flew out of it on her right hand and her legs, and a stubbornness that had no rational basis, and she leveled with less air underneath her than she wanted to think about, and she sat there for a moment breathing like a runner. "Come on," she said out loud. "Come on. You didn't come back to the sky just to fall out of the easy part." She got her left hand back, mostly. And on her display, 3 tracks were climbing. They had done the smart thing, at last found each other by voice since their instruments were useless, and started climbing out of the top of the layer to reset and clear air where numbers would matter again. 3 coordinated aircraft against 1 exhausted woman with about 4 minutes of fuel and 1.5 working arms. If they got above the weather and organized, she was going to die. She had 2 choices, and she looked at both of them for approximately 1 second. She could stay in the lair where she was safe and let them reform and face them clean. Or she could follow them up out of the only advantage she had left. It was not a choice. It had never once been a choice, not from the moment she let go of that cart. She came up out of the weather on their tails. They were still turning toward each other. Wings level energy, low, not yet a formation caught in the single worst 4 seconds of their day, and Wren Calloway came out of the gray behind them, like something rising out of a grave. "That's the mistake," she said quietly. "You climbed to reset. You gave me your backs to do it. In 2 years of pushing a mop, I never once forgot that the most dangerous moment in any fight is the moment you think you've made it to safety." 2 tracks. The operations room came apart. Whatever had been holding 12 people together for 11 minutes let go all at once. Grown men shouting, a woman with 19 years in uniform, crying openly at her console, somebody pounding the top of a cabinet with the flat of his hand. "Two," Reynolds was screaming. "Captain, it's 2. She's actually going to—" "Don't." Holloway's voice stopped him cold. "Don't say it. Don't you dare say it." Because he was a pilot, and pilots are the most superstitious human beings alive. And he had watched too many good ones die in the last 90 seconds of a fight they had already won. "Look at her track, Reynolds. Look at how she's flying now." Reynolds looked, and what he saw made his stomach drop because the turns were a fraction slower. The lines were fraying at the edges. The lethal precision that had carved through 4 aircraft was coming apart, not suddenly, but visibly, the way a rope goes. "She's running out," Ward said, "of fuel, of herself." Above the layer, Wren Calloway was fighting for consciousness. Every turn now was 2 fights, one against 2 aircraft, and one against the gray circle closing in from the edges of her own vision. Her left arm was working on about 40% and lying to her about the rest. Her legs were shaking against the pedals in a way she could not stop. She had spent 2 years of stored strength in 11 minutes, and there was, in the most literal sense, nothing left in her. 2 aircraft. On any other day of her life, 2 would have been nothing. She was empty. They were not. And these were the last 2, which meant they were the best 2. The careful ones, the disciplined ones who had survived precisely because they didn't reach. They came at her in a scissors, one high and one low, working her back and forth between them. And for the first time in the entire fight, Ren Calloway was reacting instead of dictating. Both she and the 2 men knew it. "Come on," she gasped, hauling through a defensive turn that took the last of her energy and gave nothing back. "Come on, not like this. Not after all of it." Nothing answered her. "Diaz, Halloran, Boone." Her voice was going. "Somebody help me. I don't have anything left." And on the ground they heard it. They heard Ghost, the woman who had faced 6 aircraft without one tremor in her voice, who had talked 4 terrified kids home like she was reading them a story, finally sound tired, finally sound afraid, finally sound like a 25-year-old. It went through that base like a blade, because if she was afraid, it was real. If she was afraid, the thing they had all quietly started to believe in could end some other way. Adrian Holloway grabbed the net himself. "Ghost Marrow Point actual." His voice shook, and he did not care. Ren, listen to me. Cape Ferris is 9 minutes out. 9. You don't have to win this. You only have to live. Break off, run, get on the deck and stay alive, and let them come to you. You've done enough. Do you hear me? You have done more than enough. And Ren Calloway, hunted through clear air by the 2 best pilots she had faced all day, with a dead arm and gray closing in on her, sight heard the word enough, and thought about the last time somebody had said it to her. A room, a flag, a general. 214 saved and 9 lost, and a voice telling her she had done enough, more than enough, that she should be proud, and then 2 years in an apartment with nothing on the walls. Learning that enough is the loneliest word in the language when you are the only one left alive to hear it. "No," she whispered. Then on the open channel so the whole base heard it, "No, Captain, I ran once. I let somebody tell me I'd done enough, and I have spent 2 years dying of it in a hallway with a bucket." Her breathing was ragged, and her voice was absolutely certain. "I'm not running today. Not from 2, not from anybody, not ever again." And with the last of everything she had, Ren Calloway stopped defending. She reversed straight into the 2 of them, into the closing teeth of the scissors, head-on at a closure rate that made the numbers meaningless. A move so aggressive and so hopeless, and so completely without regard for her own survival, that both men flinched, because nothing in their training had prepared them for an opponent who was visibly out of energy, out of options, out of everything, and coming straight at them anyway. An opponent who had stopped trying to live and had started trying only to make it cost. That flinch was all she needed. The low one broke first, hauling away on pure animal instinct, and in breaking he crossed in front of his own leader. And for about a fifth of a second, the geometry of 3 aircraft arranged itself into one perfect, impossible solution that only a person who had been reading skies since she was 19 could ever have seen coming. Ren took it, 1 track left. And then it was 2 aircraft alone in clear air above the weather, circling each other with about 3 minutes of fuel and 1 working arm between them. Ivo Marek had watched a single defender dismantle a formation of 6 in 11 minutes. I was not a coward. He had done this work for a long time, and he had been in bad situations and come home from all of them. And he had never once felt anything like what he was feeling now, which was not the fear of a machine or of a shot, but the specific animal terror of realizing that the thing you are fighting does not run out. Every time he had thought she was finished, she had produced something else. Skill, then weather, then patience, then a mercy he did not understand, and now a willingness to die that he could not match and could not defend against. He keyed his own flight net out of habit, and there was nobody on it. And then the American voice came up on the open channel, and it was so exhausted that it barely held together, and it was still somehow unbelievably gentle. "You're the last one." Marek said nothing. "You watched it happen. 5 of your people are gone, and I'm still here, and you cannot beat me. Not today, not in my weather." Her breath rasped in the mask, and the exhaustion in it made the words heavier instead of lighter. "But I don't want you dead. You are lying. No. A long pause. I have watched enough people die. I have carried 9 of them every single day for 2 years, and I've done it while emptying trash cans so nobody would ever look at me, and I am so tired of watching men fall out of the sky. Her voice caught once and steadied. You were on that hill. You took 9 people from me, and you let me believe it was my fault, and I have wanted to find you for 2 years. Then finish it. That's the thing, Ren said. I don't want you dead. I want you alive. I want you to fly home, and I want you to tell the man who sold us that Ghost is not dead, and Ghost knows his handwriting now. And I want him to have to live with that for the rest of his life, the way I've lived with the Valley. Nothing on the channel. Turn around, Marek. That's the last time I'm going to offer it. In the operations room, nobody was breathing. Then the track turned. He broke off, and he dove, and he ran for the line as fast as his aircraft could carry him. And Ren Calloway, who had exactly enough left in her body for one more turn, did not chase, could not have chased, and would not have chased, even if she'd had it. That's it, she breathed. That's the last one. They're gone. And 40 miles behind her, a slow, unarmed logistics aircraft with 60 human beings on board, whose crew had spent the last 11 minutes being told absolutely nothing by anybody, continued straight and level toward Marrow Point on a routine profile, entirely unaware that anything at all had happened. The operations room did not cheer. That was the thing every person in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. The silence. A cheer is what you give when your side scores. This was not that. This was the silence you give in the presence of something you have no framework for. Grown officers stood with tears running down their faces and made no sound at all, and nobody looked away from anybody because half the room was doing the same thing. Adrian Holloway lowered the handset in a hand that would not stop shaking and put the other one over his eyes. Silas Ward said very quietly, she let him go. She had him. She had him dead to rights, empty one arm, and she let him fly home. Ward's face was the face of a man who has had every assumption he owns rearranged in a quarter of an hour. Who is that captain, not the call sign, not the file? Who is a person who does that? She's what the rest of us pretend to be, Holloway said, and she's been cleaning our floors for 2 years and none of us ever learned her name. Shame. Except it was not over because the fight was won and the far more dangerous thing was still in front of her, which was getting home. The adrenaline that had carried Ren through 11 minutes drained out of her all at once, and what it left behind was a devastation so complete that she nearly lost consciousness sitting straight and level with nobody left to shoot at her. Her vision swam. Her hands that had just done impossible things shook so badly she could barely hold the stick. Marrow Point, she said, and the calm was gone at last now that the danger to other people had passed. Ghost, threats are clear. All hostiles down or departed. Ghost Marrow Point, copy all. I'm in trouble. The room stopped again. Say again, Ghost. I've got nothing left, sir. Her voice was thin and unsteady and very young. My left arm's gone. It went in the layer and it hasn't come back all the way. Braddock's numbers were good. I've got maybe 4 minutes of gas and the weather's between me and the field. A breath. I flew through that layer fresh. I don't know if I can fly through it like this. If the shear catches me low and I can't muscle out of it. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Every person in that room knew exactly how that sentence ended. Holloway looked at the display. Between one exhausted 25-year-old and a runway sat the weather that had been her weapon 4 minutes ago and was now the last enemy standing. Then you don't fly through it, he said. You go around. South edge. Slow and gentle, Ren, and if it takes every pound you've got, that's what it takes. Sir, the fuel. I don't care about the fuel. I have 4 fire crews and a foam truck and the whole base standing on that ramp, and if you come down short, we will come and get you out of the mud. No more heroics. You already saved everybody. His voice broke completely in front of 12 subordinates, and he did not care about that either. Let me get you home. Just let me get you down. And Ren Calloway, who had spent 2 years convinced that the kindest thing she could do for the world was to remove herself from it, heard the commanding officer of an entire naval air station beg her to come home. Something in her chest that had been frozen solid for 731 days cracked, and it hurt more than the shoulder. Okay, she whispered. Okay, Captain. South edge, slow and gentle. I'll try. Word went through the ramp like cold water. She won. She won, and she might not make it back. Roy Dunham put his cover back on and went at a dead run for the crash crews, shouting for them to stage and to be ready, and God help him to pray. Nia Sandoval stood with both hands over her mouth, and Cole Braddock came down out of the tower and stood on the ramp with the exercise board still in his hands because he had forgotten he was holding it. The arc around the south edge took 4 minutes and 40 seconds, and they were the longest of Ren's life because there was nothing left in her to do it with. Every small correction cost more than it should have. Twice her vision funneled down to almost nothing, and she had to talk herself back out of the dark, breathing hard, forcing the blood up. "Stay with me," she muttered. "Stay with me. Boone, you always said I was too stubborn to die." Her voice cracked into something that was almost a laugh and almost not. "Let's find out if you were right." She came around the southern edge, and the runway opened up in front of her, and the sight of that long, ordinary strip of concrete put something back into her that the exhaustion had taken out. "Marrow Point Ghost is on final." "Ghost Marrow Point, you are cleared to land. Everything's out of your way. The whole world's out of your way." "Copy." A pause. "Captain, if I don't put her down clean, you tell those kids something for me." "You're going to tell them yourself." "Tell them the loudest one in the room is almost never the strongest," Ren said. "And tell them the quiet ones are quiet because they already found out what happens when you're not." "You are going to tell them yourself, Lieutenant Commander." Holloway's voice was fierce. "You hear me now, bring my airplane home." And in the operations room, and on the ramp, and in the fire trucks, staged along the runway, and in the ready room, where a dozen young pilots who had laughed at her for 2 years stood in complete silence. Every single soul at Marrow Point Naval Air Station watched a single aircraft come down out of the clearing sky, flown by a woman with one working arm and about 90 seconds of fuel and a heart that flatly refused to quit. The wheels touched. The aircraft rolled out long and straight and slow, and 200 people rose to their feet at once and did not make a sound. It stopped, and then nothing happened for 3 seconds. The canopy stayed shut, the engine wound down, and 200 people who had just watched Ren Calloway do the impossible stood frozen on that ramp, absolutely certain, all of them, at the same time that she had spent the last of herself on the final 100 feet and had nothing left to open it with. "Come on," Adrian Holloway whispered, knuckles white. "Come on, Ren, show me." The canopy came up, slowly, badly. But it came up and a gloved hand appeared over the rail, and then a helmet, and Ren Calloway pulled herself upright in the seat like a woman 4 times her age and sat there in the open air alive. The base let out a breath it had been holding for 11 minutes in one landing. And then the noise came starting somewhere near the fuel farm with one voice and spreading and building until the whole ramp was roaring, hundreds of people shouting a call sign. Most of them had learned 40 minutes earlier, and Ren sat in that cockpit and did not understand it at first because 2 years of being invisible had trained the ability to believe a crowd could be cheering for her right out of her body. Roy Dunham got to the ladder first 2 rungs at a time faster than a man his age had any business moving. He didn't salute. He didn't speak. He reached into the cockpit and took her shaking hand in both of his and held on. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice went completely, 22 years. "I have never seen anything like what I just saw. Not in training, not anywhere." He gripped harder. "And we had you cleaning our floors." "Senior Chief." Even now, wrung out to nothing, there was warmth in it. "You cleared my ladder when I needed it cleared. That's all a pilot ever really needs." She squeezed his hands. "Now help me down. My legs aren't going to do this by themselves." He got her out of the seat, and when her boots touched the ramp and she stood there swaying with an old chief holding her up on one side, the crowd surged forward and then stopped all at once, as if some collective instinct told 200 people that this woman had given enough of herself for one day and did not need to be swarmed. They formed a wide circle instead, and then they saluted her. And Cole Braddock pushed through it with a chalkboard still in his hands, and the whole ramp went quiet in a different way, a wary way, because every person there had seen what he'd done to her in that hangar. He stopped in front of her. "This morning," he said, and his voice was wreckage, "I kicked your bucket across the deck. And 4 days before that, I shoved your cart into a tool cabinet in front of my friends because a janitor found a leak I didn't." "Lieutenant, let me finish, please." He was shaking. 4 hours later, you got in my squadron's aircraft and you went up alone against 6 people so that 60 strangers on a lift nobody's ever heard of would land on time and never even know about it. His face came apart. I've spent my whole career thinking I was the best. And I stood on this ramp today and listened to you do things I will study for the rest of my life and never once come close to. And the whole time you were up there, you kept trying to talk them into going home. He couldn't hold it. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no way to make it right. I know that. I just needed you to hear me say it in front of everybody because I said all the other things in front of everybody. The whole base waited, and Wren Calloway lifted an arm that could barely lift and put her hand on his shoulder. Cole, look at me. He did through everything. That call you made on the net about the totalizer, the 400 pounds, that was the difference. If I'd fought that fight on the numbers in front of me, I'd be in the water right now. She held his eyes. You saved my life about 11 minutes ago, and you did it with a chalkboard, and then you walked out here in front of 200 people and told the truth about yourself out loud. That's harder than flying. Flying's easy for me. It's the one thing I know how to do. Braddock broke down completely, and she pulled him in and held him while he did, and half the ramp went with him. And up in the tower, Adrian Holloway watched it through the glass and shook his head slowly and said to nobody at all, she landed 4 minutes ago, and she's still saving people. Then Silas Ward came through the door behind him, and he was not running anymore, and his face was wrong. Captain? What? We found Slate's badge, Ward said. It's in a trash can outside the fuel farm, and the motor pool just called. One of the R11 refuelers is gone off the line. Adrian Holloway heard the words R11 refueler, and his whole body went cold from the scalp down. How full? Sir. How full, Silas? 6,000 gallons, Ward said. They topped it at 1,100 for the recovery. Holloway was already at the window. Down on the ramp, 40 aircraft sat wingtip to wingtip in the recovery line, where they had been parked since the block came home, because that was where you parked them, and because there had never in the history of that base been a single reason not to. And 200 people stood in a circle in the middle of the ramp around a 25-year-old woman who could not stand up without help. Get on the base net, Holloway said. Right now, get everybody off that ramp. So, Wren heard the tone go out over the loudspeakers, and she knew before the words came. She had been standing there with Braddock's shoulder under her right arm and Dunham's hand on her left elbow, and she was for the first time in 731 days letting people hold her up, and she was so tired that the world had started coming to her in pieces. Then the tone, then a voice she didn't recognize saying, all personnel, clear the flight line. All personnel, clear the flight line. This is not a drill. And something in Wren Calloway came up out of the floor of her chest for the third time that day. What is that? Braddock said. She didn't answer him. She had turned her head, and she was looking down the taxiway toward the south end, and Roy Dunham followed her eyes and said, Oh, sweet Jesus. The refueler was moving. Not fast. That was the horror of it. It was not fast. It did not have to be fast. It was 6,000 gallons rolling at maybe 30 miles an hour on a straight piece of concrete with nothing at all between it and the recovery line, except 400 yards of open taxiway and a crowd of 200 people who had come out to watch a hero land. Get them off the ramp, Wren said. Ma'am, get them off the ramp. Dunham turned around and became a senior chief again in half a second, and his voice went across that ramp like a hammer. Move, everybody north off. The concrete. Move, and 200 people who had been standing in reverent silence 30 seconds earlier scattered. Braddock stayed. That's Slate, Wren said. She was watching the truck. She had gone completely still. He's not running? What? If he were running, he'd have taken his truck at 10:40 when he ditched his badge, and he'd be 80 miles gone. She was doing something with her breathing slow and deep down into the belly. He didn't run. He stayed on this base for 3.5 hours, and he waited. He waited to find out whether the 6 of them got the lift. And they didn't. They didn't, because of me. Her voice did not change at all, so now he finishes it himself. Silas Ward's truck came skidding around the corner of the maintenance hangar with 2 masters-at-arms in it, and Ward was out of it before it stopped, and he took one look at the taxiway and one look at the aircraft line, and his face told everybody what the math was. Can you get in front of him? Braddock shouted. With what? Ward's voice was raw. I've got a pickup truck. He's got 40 tons, and he's already past the checkpoint. If I ram him at that angle, I bounce off, and he keeps going. There's nothing between him and that line. And Wren Calloway looked around the ramp once the way she had looked at a radar display 4 hours earlier. All of it at once, the whole problem. The whole shape in her eyes stopped on the aircraft tug parked outside the maintenance hangar, with its engine still warm from the morning. She took her arm off Braddock's shoulder. Ma'am, she got about 4 steps before her legs went, and she caught herself on the wing of an aircraft and pushed off it and kept going, and Dunham shouted her name, and Braddock started after her, and she said without turning around in a voice that stopped him dead, "Stay off this taxiway, Cole." She got into the tug seat on the third try. Her left arm was not going to help her. She used her right and her legs and the seat back, and she got in, and the engine was already running, and she put it in gear and swung that heavy thing out onto the taxiway with her hand shaking so badly on the lever that she had to press her wrist against her thigh to steady it. In the tower, Adrian Holloway said, "What is she doing?" And then he understood, and he said, "No," out loud and grabbed the net. "Ghost Wren, get out of that tug. That's an order. That is a direct order." She didn't have a radio. That was the thing that would haunt Holloway for the rest of his life. She had climbed into a piece of ground equipment with no net, no way for him to reach her. Nothing at all, and he had to stand at a window and watch it. The tug was slower than the refueler. It didn't matter. It never had to be faster. It only had to be somewhere first. And Wren Calloway had spent her whole adult life calculating intercepts in 3 dimensions at the speed of sound and doing it in 2 dimensions at 30 miles an hour. With a tow tractor was for her almost restful. She saw where the truck would be. She drove to that place, and she put the tug broadside across the taxi, weigh 40,000 pounds of steel, sideways a wall, and she killed the engine and set the brake. And then she did the only thing that was left, which was that she stayed in the seat. Because if she got out and ran, Slate would simply swerve around a parked tug on open concrete, and everything would have been for nothing. The only way to stop a man who has decided to die is to be a thing he cannot get past, and the only thing he could not get past was a human being who would not move. 200 people on the north side of that ramp understood it at the same moment. Nia Sandoval put both hands over her eyes and turned away, and then turned back because she could not look. Roy Dunham said her name once. Braddock started onto the concrete, and Ward caught him around the chest with both arms and held on while the kid fought him. "Let go of me. You can't reach her. Let go of me." "You cannot reach her, Lieutenant." Ward's voice broke in the middle of it. "Nobody can reach her. That's the whole point. That's been the whole point all day."
This time.
Wren keyed the tug's little radio to the base frequency, and her voice went out over every loudspeaker on Merrill Point Naval Air Station. "Slate." The refueler kept coming. "This is the janitor." Somebody on the north side of the ramp made a sound. "I'm the one who was standing 40 feet from your operations room door when you pulled your trigger at 1300 hours. I'm the one who broke your slave in 90 seconds. I'm the one who took 11 days of your work apart in 11 minutes. Her breathing was audible on the net, and her voice was flat calm. "I'm sitting in a tow tractor directly in your path, and I am not going to move. 200 yards. You can stop this truck, and you can face what you did like a man who used to be worth something. Or you can drive through me and add murder to treason and still not reach that line because there's a security cordon forming behind me right now, and you'll be dead before you're clear of the wreck." 150. Now here's the part I want you to actually hear Emmett. She said his first name, and every person listening felt it land. 2 years ago, there was a valley. 10 of us went in and 9 didn't come out, and the men on that hill were waiting for us. They knew our ingress. They knew our timing. They were sitting up there before we crossed the line. Her voice did not rise 1 degree. "I got that confirmed today at 19,000 feet by the man who was on it. So I know it was sold, and an hour ago you tried to sell 60 more. The refueler did not slow. 100 yards. "I spent 731 days believing I killed those 9 people, Wren said. "I cleaned your floors. I emptied your trash. I walked past your bay every single morning and said good morning to you, and you said it back, and you knew the whole time." A pause, and this was the only moment her voice moved at all. "You watched me do that, Emmett, every day, for 2 years, and you never once said anything." 50 yards. "So the fear you're counting on, the thing that makes people jump out of the way, I don't have it. You took it off me in that valley. There's nothing left in this world you can threaten me with." 30. Wren Calloway folded her hands in her lap. She did not close her eyes. She looked straight through the windshield of that truck at the face of the man behind the wheel, and she let him see her, and what he saw looking back at him was a 25-year-old woman with a dead arm and a ponytail coming loose, and absolutely no intention of moving ever for any reason. 20. On the north side of the ramp, Cole Braddock stopped fighting Silas Ward and screamed her name. 10. And Master Chief Emmett Slate, 48 years old, 11 years at Marrow Point. A wall of commendations and a photograph of a boat taped inside his locker stared into the face of a woman who would not move and could not be frightened and had already beaten him twice today, and he could not do it. He stood on the brakes. The refueler skited, shuddered, screamed, and stopped, with its bumper close enough to the tug that Wren could have reached out and put her palm flat on it. The whole base made one sound at once. Joe. She climbed down out of that seat before anybody could get to her, and she almost went to her knees when her boots hit the concrete, and she walked to the door of the truck on legs that were barely holding, while the masters-at-arms dragged Emmett Slate out from behind the wheel. She did not shout at him. She did not put a hand on him. She stood there and looked at him, and what was on her face was a sadness so complete that everybody within 20 feet went quiet. 11 years, she said. Slate wouldn't look up. These people trusted you. Dunham cleared aircraft next to you for a decade. Half the technicians on this base learned their trade off your bench. That kid Reynolds in the operations room, 22 years old, you signed his qual. She shook her head slowly. And you were going to let all of them burn on a ramp. You don't know what they had on me, Slate said. His voice was ruined. You don't know what I don't care. It was the first hard thing she had said all day. I have listened to 9 people I love die on a radio, Wren said. Diaz was 29. Halloran had 2 kids. Boone was 23 years old, and he called me man because he thought I could keep him alive, and I couldn't because you told them where we'd be. She stepped back. Whatever they had on you, whatever the number was, you traded 9 of the best people who ever lived for it, and you didn't even get the lift. They took him away in restraints, and the ramp watched in absolute silence. And then slowly the way weather turns, 200 people faced Wren Calloway, and for the second time in 1 hour came to attention and saluted her. But this time she did not stand there awkwardly, not knowing what to do with it. This time, Wren Calloway straightened her spine and looked around at all of them, the young pilots and the crew chiefs and the fire crews, and a comms petty officer with tears all over her face who had once bought 2 coffees instead of 1, and she brought her right hand up and returned it. Up in the tower, Adrian Holloway turned to Silas Ward with his face wet and said the thing every person on that base was thinking. We walked past her for 2 years, he said, and in 4 hours she saved this station twice. In the air and on the ground, against an enemy and against one of our own. He shook his head. I don't think we deserved her, Silas, but God help me, I am never letting anybody here forget her again. The story could not be contained after that. For 6 days, Marrow Point held its breath and kept its mouth shut, and then it came apart anyway because a thing like that does not stay quiet. By the end of the week, files that had been sealed 2 years earlier were coming off shelves in rooms with no windows because a lot of very senior people suddenly needed to understand how a woman they had listed as separated from service had defended an American naval air station against 6 advanced aircraft with practice-configured stores and 1 working arm. And it was Wren's night, the night she did not go home, the night she sat in a borrowed office with maintenance logs and badge records and read them the way she had once read enemy formations that gave the counterintelligence people the thread. She found it at 4 in the morning. Not the 0338 entry. Ward had already found that one. She found the second one 11 months earlier, buried in a personnel movement request that had no business being in a maintenance file at all. And when she put her finger on the line, she sat very still for a long time. Silas Ward across the desk said, "What?" "That's our ingress request," Wren said, "for the valley. That's my mission, Commander. That's the routing package. 214 people on the ground and 10 of us going to get them." She turned the page around. And that's Emmett Slate's signature in the distribution block because he was the systems chief who cut the comms plan. Ward put both hands over his mouth. "He didn't just sell today," Wren said. "He sold us." She did not cry. She had done all of that in a cockpit at 19,000 feet with nobody watching. She simply sat there with a piece of paper in her hand and let 2 years of a wrong answer fall out of her. And what was underneath it was not relief, and it was not vindication. It was rage, and then about a minute later, it was something much stranger and much quieter. Ma'am, Ward said. 9 people, Wren said. For 2 years, I have gotten out of bed every single morning and told myself my best killed them, that my judgment killed them, that the only responsible thing left to do with a person like me was to put her in a hallway with a bucket where she couldn't hurt anybody. It wasn't your judgment. No, she set the page down. It never was. And Silas Ward, who had spent 8 months noticing things about a woman and had never once noticed the only thing that mattered, said, "Then what do you do now?" Wren Calloway looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face in 8 months, and it took him a second to identify it, and when he did, it nearly undid him. She looked like somebody who had just been let out of a room. The network slate belonged to Unraveled over the following 4 months, and it reached a great deal further than one base, and the 9 names finally got written down in a file as something other than misadventure. A 2-star flew out in the second week to sit across a desk from her. He laid it out in careful official language reinstatement, at rank and then some. A squadron, medals to go with the ones she had never worn, and had in fact left in a drawer in an apartment above a hardware store. A whole future built on the wreckage of the past she had tried to walk away from. "You disappeared 2 years ago," he said. "The Navy let you disappear because, after what happened, we thought you had earned the right to be left alone. We were wrong to lose you." He leaned forward. "Do you understand what you are, Lieutenant Commander? There may be 5 people alive who could have flown what you flew that afternoon. You did it 2 years cold in a borrowed airframe on a bad shoulder alone. The country needs you back. Name the command. It's yours." Wren listened to all of it. And when he finished, she was quiet for a while, and then she asked a question that stopped the room. "How many did I save that day, sir?" The general blinked. "I'm sorry. The lift, Dagger Flight, the people who'd have been on that ramp when the refueler got to the recovery line." She was not being rhetorical. She genuinely wanted the number. "Roughly 200 and some on the ramp," Holloway said quietly from the corner. 60 on Kilo 22, 4 in Dagger, call it 300 Wren. 300, she repeated. She nodded slowly to herself. "And in the valley, 214 on the ground. And 9 of mine?" Nobody said anything. "For 2 years, I did that math every single morning," Wren said. 214 against 9. And every single morning, the 9 won, because the 9 were mine, and the 214 were strangers I never met." She looked up. "That's why I disappeared. Not because I couldn't fly. Because I decided that the safest thing I could do for the world was to take myself out of the equation so nobody would ever die from a decision I made. And now," the general said, "and now I know I stood in a corridor with a mop in my hands on Friday afternoon and listened to a system die, and I almost walked away." Her voice did not rise, but something under it did. "I got 4 steps, sir, 4. If I'd gotten 660 people would be in the water, and there would be a crater where that ramp is, because the one person in that building who could see it had spent 2 years convincing herself she didn't belong in the room." She sat back. "So no, sir, I understand what you're offering me. A squadron, my own command, and I'm telling you I don't want it. Because you're afraid of it. No." And for the first time in that office, Wren Calloway smiled. "Because I finally figured out what the math was actually telling me." Which is what? That one person in the right place at the right time can save 300 people in an afternoon, she said. "Which means the most valuable thing I can do with the rest of my life isn't to be that one person. It's to make 100 of them." She leaned forward. "I want the schoolhouse, sir. I want the ones who haven't been broken yet. I want to take everything that Valley taught me and everything that let me come back after 2 years and beat 6 aircraft in a sheer layer, and I want to pour all of it into kids before they have to learn it the way I did." Her voice softened. "I don't want to command. I want to teach." The general stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood up and came around the desk and did something a 2-star almost never does. He offered her his hand, and when she took it, he held it in both of his. "In 31 years, he said, I have never had anybody turn down a command to go teach, and I have never in my life been prouder to have an offer refused." There were goodbyes before she left Merrill Point. Roy Dunham found her by the hangar, where all of it had started, the same deck where a bucket had gone across the concrete under the nose of an aircraft 10 days and one entire lifetime ago. He wasn't a man of many words, and he didn't try to become one. 22 years I've been putting people in cockpits, ma'am, he said, turning his cover over in his hands. I'm going to retire in about 18 months. And when my grandkids ask me what the most amazing thing I ever saw was, I'm not going to tell them about an air show or an admiral or any record. His voice cracked. I'm going to tell them about the girl who cleaned our floors. I'm going to tell them how I got to clear her ladder. Wren took the old chief's hand. You did more than clear my ladder, Senior Chief. She held on. For 2 years, you were one of maybe 3 people on this base who ever looked me in the eye. You had no idea who I was. You were decent to me anyway. She squeezed. That's rarer than anything I ever did in an airplane. Enjoy your retirement. You've earned every day of it. Nia Sandoval didn't try to say anything profound. She just hugged her hard the way you hug somebody you're afraid you'll never see again. And when she pulled back, her face was soaked. I brought you a coffee once, she said, laughing through it. One cold morning, and you looked at it like nobody had done anything nice for you in years. Nobody had, Wren said gently. That coffee, Nia, you'll never know. I had convinced myself I'd successfully made the whole world forget I existed. And then a stranger walked up and handed me a cup and treated me like a person. I went home that night and cried on the floor because I'd forgotten that I mattered, and you reminded me. She took Nia's face in both hands. Never stop being the one who brings the coffee. You have no idea whose life you're saving when you do it. And then there was Braddock. He'd been waiting off to the side, turning his cover in his hands the way Dunham had unable to look at her. I don't know how to say goodbye to you, he admitted. After what I did and what you did, I don't know what a person's supposed to say. You already said it, on the ramp, in front of 200 people out loud, when you could have let me leave and never faced it. She studied him. So I'm going to give you something to carry, Cole, and I want you to have it for the rest of your career. You asked me on that ramp how a person gets to be good at this. You thought it was scores. It's not scores. It's not even flying. She stepped closer. The best pilot I ever flew with was a man named Diaz who hummed off key on the open net until I made him stop. Diaz wasn't the best because of his hands. He was the best because the second anything went wrong, every single time, the first thing out of his mouth was about somebody else. She put her hand on his shoulder one last time. The good ones aren't the ones who think they're invincible. The good ones know exactly how breakable they are, and they go up anyway for somebody else. You've got that in you. I heard it come out of a chalkboard at 19,000 feet. Spend the rest of your life feeding it instead of starving it. Cole Braddock couldn't answer. He nodded with tears running down his face, and Wren Calloway smiled at him, and for the first time the young man understood that the woman he had spent 4 days humiliating had just handed him the most valuable thing anybody had ever given him. 14 months later, she stood at the front of a classroom full of 19 and 20-year-olds and let them think whatever they wanted about her. They were so young. That was what got her every single time. How young, how certain, how much like Boone and how much like Braddock before the sky had ever had a conversation with him. They looked at a woman in her 20s with a chestnut ponytail and a shoulder that still didn't come all the way up, and she could read the doubt on every face in the front 2 rows. Who is this? What could she possibly teach us? She let it sit. She had earned that silence. My name is Wren Calloway, she said. Some of you have heard a story about a pilot they called Ghost. A pilot who went into a valley and brought 214 people out and left 9 of her own in it and then vanished. The room changed. That story's true. I'm the pilot, and for 2 years afterward, I pushed a cleaning cart down the corridors of a naval air station, and about 400 people walked past me every single day, and not one of them ever learned my name. Nobody was moving. They thought I was nobody. They thought a person in a t-shirt with a mop had nothing to teach them about anything. She stepped out from behind the lectern. They were wrong, and that is the first lesson, and it is the one that will keep you alive when nothing else will. She walked slowly along the front row, looking each of them in the eye. Never underestimate the person standing next to you, the mechanic, the controller, the kid in the galley, the one who doesn't talk much. She stopped. The quietest person in any room is very often quiet because they have already survived the thing the rest of you are still afraid of, and they don't feel the need to discuss it. A hand went up in the back, a cadet nervous. Ma'am, if you hadn't walked into that operations room, what would have happened? Wren looked at him for a long moment. The lift would have gone down with 60 people on it, she said simply. The refueler would have reached the recovery line. Daggerflight would have come home into a base that was on fire and weather with nowhere to put down. She let it land. And I would have driven home that evening and cleaned my apartment and told myself it wasn't my fault because I was just the janitor and nobody could have expected me to do anything. Her voice dropped. And I would have known I was lying every day for the rest of my life. She looked around the room. That's the second lesson, and it's for the quiet ones, the humble ones, the ones like me. She let the silence build. Humility is a beautiful thing right up until it becomes an excuse. Do not let your modesty talk you out of the room when the room needs what you have. The world does not need you to be small. When people are about to die and you are the one who can see it, being humble is just cowardice wearing a nicer coat. Stand up, walk into the room, do the thing only you can do, every single time. Then she gave them the last and truest things she knew. I lost 9 people I loved in a valley I'm still not allowed to name, she said quietly. And for 2 years I let that convince me to disappear. I was wrong. Because you do not honor the dead by hiding from the sky that took them. You honor them by getting back into it and flying better, and by teaching the next ones to fly better still, so that fewer people ever have to lose what I lost. Her eyes went across every face in that room, and there was steel in them, and there was love in them, and there was the entire weight of a life spent doing impossible things for other people. One of you is going to be the reason somebody's daughter comes home. One of you is going to be the voice on the radio that keeps a terrified kid alive. One of you is going to be the one who walks into the room when everybody else is too frightened to move. She squared up in front of them. That is the job. Everything else, the scores, the swagger, the medals in the drawer, is noise. She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. Now let's begin, because I intend to make every one of you better than I ever was, and I do not intend to lose a single one of you along the way. Years went by, and Ghost became a name every pilot in the fleet knew again. Not for a valley nobody was allowed to talk about, but for a classroom. Her students flew all over the world, and when the sky turned bad and the picture went to noise and the fear came up, their throats, they heard her voice in their heads, calm and warm, and entirely without hurry, telling them they were going to be all right, telling them to think about the other people first, telling them to walk into the room. Some of them saved lives that never knew their names. Every one of those lives traced back along a line that only Wren Calloway could see, to a woman pushing a cart down a quiet corridor at 4 in the morning while young men laughed at her across a hangar deck. Cole Braddock made lieutenant, commander, and then commander, and for the rest of his career he never once walked past a person in coveralls without stopping and looking them in the face and learning their name, because he had found out the hard way in front of 200 people that you never know who is standing beside you. Erin Holloway took her own squadron. On the wall of her office, she hung one photograph, not of an aircraft, but of a small woman with a chestnut ponytail standing at the front of a classroom, and under it 4 words, "The pilot who saved me." And on a bright morning at the schoolhouse, an old retired senior chief named Dunham brought his grandchildren to watch a demonstration flight, and he pointed up at a formation flying with a precision and a discipline and a care for one another that did not happen by accident. And he told them the story of the janitor, and every single word of it was true. They had judged a woman by her uniform instead of her character. They had mistaken her silence for weakness and her humility for the absence of worth. They had looked at the quietest person on the whole base and seen nobody at all, and she had turned out to be the greatest story any of them would ever get to tell. Because a legend does not stop existing when the world stops looking. A legend waits, patient and visible, pushing a cart down an empty corridor at 4 in the morning, until the day the sky fills up and the alarm starts screaming, and a base full of frightened people finally desperately needs the one person they never bothered to see. And on that day, the legend sets down the mop and walks into the room. So look at the person standing beside you. Learn their name today while it still costs you nothing, because the quietest one in the room is almost always carrying the greatest story you will ever hear. And God help you if you have already taught her she doesn't belong in it.